Hope you're having a good day today. It is September 21st. Our reading today, you can see the description. We're looking in Nehemiah chapter 11 and 12, the first 26 verses of Nehemiah 12. And the parallel is in 1 Chronicles chapter 9. Let's just read the first few verses of Nehemiah 11. It says, "Now the leaders of the people dwelt at Jerusalem. The rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9/10 were to dwell in other cities. And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem. These are the heads of the province who dwelt in Jerusalem. But in the cities of Judah, everyone dwelt in his own possession in their cities, Israelites, priests, Levites, Nethinim, and the descendants of Solomon's servants." Okay, so what we have is we have a list of all the folks who are there and some points that I wanted to make. And sometimes it's kind of hard to think about ideas in chapters like these, like these passages that we're looking at. But some of the things we want to point out, that Jerusalem is going to be filled. And you have those who were dwelling in Jerusalem, but then you have the tithe of the people, 1/10 is going to be pressed into dwelling in Jerusalem. But then you have those who are going to volunteer. We'll come back to that here in just a second. But the city needs to be filled. Jerusalem needs to be filled. And it needs to be filled not just for the sake of filling, but when you read the rest of the chapter, there's work that needs to be done. And I'm just mindful of one of the parables of the Lord where it talks about the feast. And all those who are invited didn't come, so he says, "Go out into the highways and the byways and the hedges and compel them to come in." And he says it's going to be filled. And in this passage just made me think of that passage. Jerusalem's going to be filled. You have those who are dwelling there, but there's work that needs to be done. And so you have this chapter and you have this concept that it's not just about numbers. Work needs to be done. Within the passage, one of the things I thought I might touch on is it talks about that there were valiant men, but then even those who were valiant, it talks about those who had oversight over them. And so you have this concept of oversight, of overseeing the work. Sometimes folks just get wrapped up in numbers and they aren't interested in the actual work that needs to be done. That here with Jerusalem, it needs filled. It needs filled because there's things to do. Okay, that's one thing I want to mention. The second thing I want to mention is that idea that some came voluntarily, some were pressed into it. Right? You have this figure of verse 1, the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem. But then you had others who willingly offered themselves. And that's just how it is. That's just how it is sometimes. That you wish, I'm sure they wished that they would have gotten everyone they needed willingly. That everybody would have willingly volunteered. Some did. Some willingly volunteered, but others had to be pressed into it. And I would suggest on a certain level that's okay. Because I think we've all been in positions like that before where, sometimes we may willingly volunteer to do something, but then other times we've kind of got to be pressed into it. And that's okay. Sometimes when people don't willingly volunteer, people don't want to willingly press. But sometimes you just got to do it. Sometimes you ask for volunteers and nobody steps up and you say, "Okay, we're going to cast lots. It's going to be you, you, and you." And they better step up. They better step up. It happens. Just think of your kids if you have kids. Sometimes they willingly do what they should do. Sometimes they have to be told and they have to be made. They have to be made to obey. That's okay. I think this is how all the Lord's commands are. That you might think about the relationship that we have with the Lord. Sometimes the relationship we have with the Lord, sometimes we come along willingly. Other times it's more like passage in Romans um, talking about slaves, and that sometimes we have to be treated like a slave. Other times we come along more willingly. Anyway, I think you understand, hopefully. But that's how it was here with Jerusalem. But in that passage, and this is for me where it gets a little more interesting. These are the heads, verse 3. These are the heads of the province who dwelt in Jerusalem: Israelites, priests, Levites, Nethinim, and the descendants of Solomon's servants. And you just look at that list, and I think what it looks like to me is Israelites, priests, Levites. What was the Levites' job? Well, the Levites' job was to help the priests. What was the Nethinim? What was their job? And that's the one we're not as familiar with, and we're going to touch on. But their job was to help the Levites. And then you have the descendants of Solomon's servants. And it's like the descendants of Solomon's servants. And to just look at that list in verse 3, look backwards through it, because I wonder if the point is not, you help them, just go backwards. The Nethinim help the Levites, who help the priests, who help everybody. I wonder if that's not the point. You help them so they can help them so they can help all of us. I wonder if that's not the idea. The Nethinim, what that name literally means, it means given ones. And I want to get over and show you one of the places where it speaks about them is in Ezra. In Ezra chapter 8, genealogy of those who returned with Ezra. Now look down at verse 20. Also of the Nethinim, whom David and the leaders had appointed for the service of the Levites. So this happened in David's time. The Nethinim, whom David and the leaders had appointed for the service of the Levites, 220 Nethinim, all of them were designated by name. But David and the leaders had appointed them. I want to see what the other translations are here. New American Standard, David and the officials had provided. King James had appointed. ESV, David and the officials had set apart. Some people in getting ready for this short talk, in the little time that I had, they equate the Nethinim with the Gibeonites. If you remember who the Gibeonites were, the Gibeonites were the people who lied about who they were, and Israel makes a covenant with them. They shouldn't have, but they did, and they have to honor the covenant. The Gibeonites were pressed into service. So some people think the Nethinim may be the same as the Gibeonites, but there's a problem with that. Or maybe not the same as the Gibeonites, but or similar to a similar situation. They were pressed into it because not much is said about them. But this is one of the passages where it shows, okay, David and the leaders appointed them for the service of the Levites. The Levites were to help the priests, and the Nethinim were to help the Levites. Given ones. Go back. I want you to see, because I think, I don't know, this may interest you, or you may. Back in our original passage in Nehemiah 11:3, Israelites, priests, Levites, Nethinim, and the descendants of Solomon's servants. Why are we talking about the descendants of Solomon's servants? And I don't know, other than they are mentioned here. And you have those, the descendants of Solomon's servants, who are counted in these people. And they have a role to play. And perhaps they wanted, and I think that may be more the point, they wanted to be a part of this work that was going on. So you have that concept, the descendants of Solomon's servants. They wanted to be a part of this. The descendants of the king's servants. Now I wonder if And when we look at the Nethinim, I'll just throw it out there. I want you to come back to the parallel to Nehemiah 11 is 1 Chronicles 9, and that's part of our reading today. Well, when you come over to 1 Chronicles chapter 9, and it's so all Israel was recorded by genealogies, right? They were inscribed in the book of the kings of Israel, but Judah was carried away captive to Babylon because of their unfaithfulness. And the first inhabitants who dwelt in the possession of their cities, and this is the parallel. The first inhabitants who dwelt in their possessions and their cities were Israelites, priests, Levites, and the Nethinim. Now the Nethinim, again, given ones who were perhaps they were appointed to this service originally. They may have been pressed into this service originally, but they were there to help the Levites. Now the question is, where did they come from? And when you look at 1 Chronicles 9, and let me turn over there in my physical Bible that I have open. When you look over in 1 Chronicles chapter 9, you have this introduction. Israelites, priests, Levites, Nethinim. But then it goes through and it details it. So from verse 3 down through verse 9, you have some of the children of Benjamin, children of Ephraim, right? Okay. Israelites. But then when you come down to verse 10, of the priests, right? That's the second one in our list of the priests. But then when you come down to verse 14, of the Levites, that's the third one in our list. Okay, so then it talks about the Levites at Jerusalem. Down in verse 17, it talks about the gatekeepers who are of the Levites. All right, that's verse 17. Down in verse 28, talks about other responsibilities they had. But then when you come down, and remember our list, Israel, Israelites, priests, Levites, and the Nethinim. And we're trying to, and I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility, and there may be absolutely nothing at all to this, but what gets me is when you come down, as you go through 1 Chronicles 9, and it lists, okay, these are the ones, the general ones, then you have the priests, then you have the Levites, and it seems like it's detailing that list at the beginning of the chapter, and when you get to the end of it, you have Saul's genealogy. King Saul, the first king of Israel. And it lists his family. It's like, why are we listing his family right here? And certainly, we know in David's time, at one point, he's going to be looking for the family of Saul, and that's the Mephibosheth account. But Mephibosheth was a son of Jonathan, but it goes through here and it lists Saul's family, and certainly Saul and his sons were killed, but we know his sons had sons too from this passage. There was extended family. Now, the very next chapter is the death of Saul and his sons. So either the end of chapter 9 is setting the stage for chapter 10 and the death of Saul and his sons, or chapter 9, the end of chapter 9 goes with chapter 9, and it's like, why is this here? When the whole rest of the chapter is detailing who are the Israelites here, some of them by name, who are the priests by name, who are the Levites, and then who are the Nethinim? Why does it mention the Nethinim? And then all of a sudden at the end of the chapter, we have those extended of Saul's house. I don't know. There you go. That's my word of wisdom for the day. I don't know. All I know is that in David's time, he pressed these individuals into the work to help the Levites. They were given to the Levites to help the Levites. And after the captivity, You have these given ones. You have these given ones who wanted to be a part of this work. And in the same context in Nehemiah, it talks about that there were those of Solomon's, as it talked about, Solomon's servants, descendants, wanted to be a part of this work. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting in trying to understand who the Nethinim were. And just, it is just a possibility because there's so little known about them. And you can study them on your own and read some of the different passages about them. We've just looked at a few, see what other folks say about them. But I just think it's interesting that at the end of 1 Chronicles 9 that all of a sudden you see Saul's family being detailed in the same context of those who would come back and dwell in Jerusalem from the exile. And that if you were descendants from the king's house, and you realize what a mess of things eventually happened, would you want to dedicate yourself and rededicate yourself to doing what you could? And I think that's the Nethinim. And pardon me for this video being a little bit longer. The Nethinim were dedicated. They were the given ones. And in that, I think, regardless of who they were, we imitate them. We help them. We do what we can to help others. Appreciate you. Hope this study, again, sorry for it being a little bit longer, but I hope it's been helpful. Hope you have a good day. Thanks for studying along with us. Hope you tune in to our next look into God's Word.